The Unitarian Universalist Church of Ventura, California, presents a homily by our minister, the Reverend Dana Worsnop, titled The Stories We Tell, recorded on Sunday morning, May 16th, 2021.
Good morning and welcome to worship with the Unitarian Universalist Church of Ventura. I am the Reverend Dana Worsnop, and it is my great pleasure and honor to serve as this congregation's minister.
Good morning also. I'm Worship Associate Jerry Mendelsohn. Welcome all into this virtual space made sacred by our presence together. We began our service with an acknowledgement that the land each of us are on is the ancestral home of Indigenous peoples. In most of Ventura County, this is the Chumash people.
The theme, the worship theme, the whole church theme for this month is story. And we humans are meaning-making beings who have been telling stories to explain our experiences and make sense of our lives since we have been human. Today is its own story, and that we get to tell together for this hour. Today, just a couple of announcements. Today, after the service at 11:30, in this very same Zoom space, the Board and Finance Committee will host our annual congregational conversation on the budget. After the service, you'll be placed into breakout rooms for a shorter coffee hour than usual, and then come on back into the main room for the conversation. We will be having the same process in just a month for our annual meeting on June 13th, which will also be after church at 11:30. And also, if you are new to us, you can choose in the breakout rooms to join the connecting room. A session with our membership coordinator, Jimmy Vasquez, and also some other people who would love to welcome you amongst us. So let us breathe, take a moment to arrive here, and open our hearts and our minds to one another as we bring forth the stories of our lives. Let us enter sacred space.
We hope that everyone here has a chalice or a candle and something to light it with. Let's light our chalices all together. We begin our service with these words by Reverend Dr. David Breeden. A day unwritten. Welcome to a new story. Let us open the book to a page yet to be written. A day still unwritten to a story yet to be told. We gather to speak of possibility. We remember the losses. We celebrate the victories. We embrace the possible over than the probable, weaving a story of hope. May we fill this fresh page wisely. May we write a new story into being. May we together inscribe the page with hope. Come, let us worship together.
Good morning. I'm Carolyn Bjerke, the music director. I'd like to invite you to join me in singing our opening hymn, for all that is our life. For all that is our lives, we sing our thanks and praise. For all of this is a gift which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad. For needs which others serve, for services we give, for work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life, for sorrow we must bear, for failures made and loss, for each new thing we learn, for fearful hours that pass, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life, for all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad.
Good morning. My name is Fidelity, and I'm the Religious Education Coordinator for our congregation. So I am curious, because I know I have you ever gotten so caught up in one of your own stories, or maybe someone else's story, that you started spinning around in circles? For our friend the fish, in today's Time for the Child in Each of Us, that is exactly what happens to him too. So I hope you enjoy today's story, The Fish Who Found the Sea, written by Alan Watts, illustrated by Kwale. Once upon a time, there was a fish who lived in the Great Sea. And because he was just an ordinary fish who had never known anything outside the Great Sea, he was not really aware that he was in it. The fish swam up and around without ever noticing that he was moving through the transparent water. Without it, he could neither swim nor live, but for all he knew, he might just as well have been moving in empty space. Then one day, something peculiar happened to him. He began to think how curious it was that he could swim, for here he was moving up and down and around in the midst of nothing at all, and all by his own power. This, he thought, was surely very clever of himself. At that moment exactly, all his skill at swimming left him, and he began to fall. He realized then that there was one chance of saving himself, to grab hold of his own tail with his mouth and hold himself up. At once he curled up and made a snap at his tail. Unfortunately, his spine was not yet supple enough, and he missed. Not yet discouraged, he tried again and again and again with the same result, so that for some time he whizzed around in circles in frantic pursuit of his own tail. The faster he chased his tail, the faster it moved away. This had been going on for some time when he began to realize that he was not getting anywhere, that his life was becoming dull, meaningless, and horribly monotonous. But he was much too frightened to stop. In the meantime, the Great Sea had been watching this extraordinary behavior with mixed feelings of amusement and sorrow. For the Great Sea was as loving as it was vast. It gave all the creatures of the deep room to live and swim around. It never intruded upon them, always retiring generously before their noses and letting itself be pushed by their tails so that they could move along. Still more, the Great Sea always surrounded them in such a way that it bore them up and made itself transparent so that they could see where they were going and enjoy all the wonders of the deep. And yet, here was a very distraught fish who thought he swam all by himself, who had gotten himself into a panic and was behaving as no fish should behave. Therefore, the great sea called out to the unhappy fish and asked him, "What do you think you are doing?" To which the fish replied, "I'm trying to catch hold of my tail and save myself from falling." "You have been doing that for a long time," observed the great sea, "and you are no nearer to catching it than when you started. So why haven't you fallen yet?" "Don't bother me," retorted the fish. "Can't you see I'm busy?" "I do see that you are busy," said the great sea. "But to what end? You haven't caught your tail, you haven't fallen into the abyss, and yet you are still very busy. How come?" "Oh, don't be stupid," snapped the fish. "How does it happen that you have stayed afloat and been able to swim during this absurd performance?" said the great sea. "Of course I haven't fallen down," said the fish, "because because I'm swimming?" This all was just too much for the fish. He stopped his chase and looked around to see who was talking to him. There was no one to be seen, and it was strange, but although he wasn't doing anything himself, he was still floating in the water, though it seemed to him as if he were suspended in empty space by some invisible force. "There now," said the great sea. "Don't you feel better? You thought you were doing it all by yourself, and yet now you see that you live in water. It is in the great sea that you are able to swim and move around and be a fish." From that moment, the fish was happier than any other fish in all the waters of the world. Setting his own end behind him, where it belonged, he set out to explore the ends of the sea. So I know that there have been more than a few times in my life where I've been absolutely certain that I am 100% correct. Thank you very much. Only to discover the next year, the next month, the next day, maybe even the next hour sometimes, that the story I was telling myself maybe wasn't the whole truth. Maybe it was a sliver of the truth or part of the truth. And what I love about this story is that we all have something to learn from the fish. So he was stubborn at first, but instead of being stubborn all the way through and refusing the great sea's help, our fish was willing to readjust and reorient when a new story offered a better path forward. So he was off and away into the ends of the sea instead of chasing his own end.
Instead of chasing his own end. Thank you, Fidelity. So lately, we have been inviting members of the church to share their stories once or twice a month. And so now here is a UU story from Joe Osborne.
Good morning. I found Unitarianism on Main Street in Ventura. Well, not directly, but it was through an acquaintance I met on Main Street that I was introduced to the Reverend David Pyle. And from there, I began photographing a series on homeless families for the Lift Up Your Voice team. From this experience, I was drawn by the focus on service from this church group. Around 2017, and with our Christian church group dwindling, Jane and I found UU Ventura. The idea of service and the importance of that to this group of worshipers had stuck with me. As I approached my retirement, I had to lay out a plan for what I wanted to do in my post-retirement years. I had been in leadership positions for most of my business career, and I really thought about how difficult getting into leadership and thriving in leadership had been for me. It was a skill that didn't come easy and one where I didn't always feel comfortable. UU Ventura has given me the opportunity to change and understand who I am through opportunities to provide service to others. First, it was working as a member of the publicity team and writing news releases for many of the events going on in the church. This was followed by working with the 545 team to help the church develop a 5-year strategy. This opportunity allowed me to blend my newfound desire to serve with a career where developing strategies was foundational. This opportunity also allowed me to better understand the history of Unitarian Universalism, as it was not something that I had been historically familiar. It also allowed me to meet more and more of the congregation members. This last year of the horrible pandemic also provided me with an opportunity to serve. Again, blending past experience in computers with a newly found desire to serve, I was able to successfully assist many of our church members with connecting to Zoom and even troubleshooting some of their computer problems. I found this to be an enormously satisfying opportunity. Now you'll find me helping neighbors, where in the past I may have just watched. I'm usually the guy in the supermarket that says, hey, I really like those rather than those. So UU Ventura has been a personally fulfilling journey for me, one in which I think I've grown as a person. Well, that's it for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Each Sunday, this congregation gives away our collection to an organization in the larger community or to funds that help people in our own church. And we now invite you to donate online. You will see the link on the next slide, the slide right here, and also it will be posted in the chat as a direct link. Our offering today goes to Ventura Homeless Prevention to pay rent for our Ventura neighbors who are facing eviction due to financial setbacks. For those whose problems are due to COVID-19, the government has now stepped in to help, which is marvelous, and yet there are still people who can't make the rent due to other causes. And Ventura Homeless Prevention is here to keep them in their homes. A story. Recently, a 76-year-old man's failing health meant that he had to quit the part-time job that had supplemented his income from his Social Security and his wife's part-time job. The family had been already paying 67% of their income for rent. And the loss of the extra money meant that they soon faced eviction. Ventura Homeless Prevention paid their rent. And then his wife got more work hours, so the family is going to manage going forward. And with donations like yours today, this Ventura Homeless Prevention can help keep our struggling neighbors in their homes. Thank you for giving generously, as you always do.
And 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Come gather round, people, wherever you roam, and make that the waters around you that grow, and accept that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changin'. Come writers and critics who prophesize with your hand, and keep your eyes wide, the chance won't come again. And don't speak too soon, for the wheel's still in spin. And there's no telling who that is naming. For the loser now will be later to win. For the times they are a-changin'. Come senators, congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in Come mothers and fathers throughout the land, and don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. Your old road is rapidly aging. Reach out a new one if you can't lend a hand, for the times they are a-changing. Thank you.
We are grateful for the generosity of this congregation, filled with people willing to change the story and change the world, and to weave a tapestry of love we call community. Thank you.
Each week, we lift up the joys and sorrows that have been shared with our community. There are two ways to submit a joy or sorrow: from a link on the website, uuventura.org, or a link in our Thursday email bulletin, UUCV This Week. When we are together in our physical sanctuary, we drop stones in water for each joy or sorrow. The ripples that go out remind us that we are all connected. Here in our online sanctuary we make together today, we see the image of ripples to help us keep that connection. I invite you now to speak aloud or in your heart the names of those you wish to celebrate or memorialize, or those who may need the loving embrace of this community. I also now invite you to type the names into our Zoom chat. By invoking their names, even when we may not hear them, you bring them into this circle of caring that we call community. We hold these names, spoken and unspoken, in the silent sanctuary of our hearts. May we be truly grateful for all that is our life.
I invite you to join me in singing our meditative hymn, Spirit of Life, in English and Spanish. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stories of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Fuente de amor, ven hacia mí.
Our readings this morning offer many perspectives on the stories we tell from many sources.
Stories are told as spells for binding the world together. John Rouse.
There are no true stories. We are making up every one of them. Pema Chodron.
There are only true stories. We are discovering the truth in them. Christina Baldwin.
Fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. Neil Gaiman and G.K. Chesterton.
I believe the true evil of American slavery was the narrative of racial difference. The story that Black people aren't fully human. And because of that, I don't think slavery ended in 1865. It just evolved. We've got to change the world by changing the narrative. These narratives, there is something better waiting for us than we've experienced, and I want us to get there. Brian Stevenson.
We cannot wish old feelings away, nor do spiritual exercises for overcoming them until we have woven a healing story that transforms our previous life's experience and gives meaning to whatever pain we have endured. Joan Borisenko.
There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. Maya Angelou.
There is a you telling yourself another story of you. Listen to her. Padraig Otwama.
Your heartache is someone else's hope. If you make it through, someone else is going to make it through. Tell your story.
Change the story, change the world. Terry Pratchett.
I invite you now into a time of stillness. Breathe. Breathe again. Get yourself here in your body. What is your story of yourself, your family, your past, your future? What new page are you turning? What new story are you bringing into being? We can always tell a new story. Let us join together in silence.
like me. I was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I can see.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Amazing grace. Amazing grace.
It was nothing but your amazing grace.
Amazing grace.
Yeah.
Amazing
You had grace on little on me.
Amazing grace.
And I'm so thankful.
Amazing grace.
For your
Amazing grace. Amazing grace.
Yeah, your
Amazing grace.
Thank you, Lord.
Amazing grace.
Thank you for washing me clean.
Amazing grace.
Yeah.
Amazing
You
grace.
looked down on little old me.
Amazing grace.
Thank you, Jesus.
Amazing
For
grace.
your amazing
Amazing
grace.
grace.
Amazing
Amazing grace.
Oh, your amazing grace.
Amazing grace.
Yes, God.
Amazing.
I thank you for your amazing grace.
Evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould once described humans as primates who tell stories. This is not perhaps a trait exclusive to humans. Who knows what tales are woven by whale song? Yet it is certainly true that humans are meaning-making beings. We weave stories to explain our experiences, to make meaning in our lives. This is a delightful skill we have acquired and honed over tens of thousands of years, tens of thousands of campfires, and not just to scare the daylights out of each other. We tell them to teach, to enliven minds, to entertain, to hand down and pass on wisdom and knowledge, to make us aware of things that we don't necessarily automatically see. We tell them to expand, to change our minds. For stories are the spells we cast to bind the world together. Stories are how we create and pass on culture. Before there was written language, people remembered and yes, then embellished and evolved stories through an oral tradition. This was often through stories, creative myths and tales, the best of which are certainly memorable. And now we learn from modern neurobiology that our brains are just actually wired this way. We get literally a hit of dopamine when we are able to pull facts or events into a coherent narrative. And it is, in fact, that moment of pleasure that we receive that gives this tale I tell today a bit of a rub. We organize our thoughts into stories, and some of them are stories that are creative, made of imagination, made up. And some are scientific, made of observation, theorizing, testing. Now, whatever you think of the creation stories from Genesis, they are certainly memorable. I have always read them as myths that are both descriptive and instructive of the human dilemma. Consciousness comes all at once in a rush for dear Eve and Adam, with the crashing awareness of mortality. The story would have it that God wished to spare them this unhappiness. Yet I have always been all in with Eve, taking that first bite of knowledge, whatever the cost. Choosing knowledge over the blissful ignorance of the garden. And there, in a nutshell, lies our human dilemma. We are alive, and we know we are going to die. Joy and woe woven fine with all that lies between, the bittersweetness and endless complexities of life. And then there's the story of evolution. Yes, it is a scientific theory based on observation, though as a coherent narrative, it has beauty and drama and surprise. Life, spiraling, swirling, branching, evolving, changing over time, over long periods of time, punctuated with cataclysms. It has brought us wonderful and weird creatures and plants that might be unbelievable did we not have a fossil record of them. We make meaning through the stories we tell, whether they are fiction, nonfiction, speculation, poetry. Shankar Vedantam of the NPR program Hidden Brain tells us a good explanation, a good story gives us pleasure. And when we can't come up with a good explanation, we feel dissatisfied. Something in the human mind yearns to make sense of the world. He calls our sense-making drive a basic human impulse, no different than thirst or hunger. And our brains literally reward us for it. As Vedantam goes on, we are rewarded because we get a hit of dopamine when we learn a new thing, when we come up with an explanation that pulls facts and events into a coherent narrative, and we can become very attached to the stories we tell. And therein lies the potential shadow side of our magnificent capacity to tell a good story. Many years ago now, I was on jury duty and called into the jury pool for a civil suit about an auto accident. I was not among the first 12 who were seated, so I was listening to the voir dire process from the gallery. The attorneys asked each potential juror whether they or anyone they were really close to had ever been in a serious accident. And of course, everyone had, and so they were asked to give the details. And in every single case, they created a coherent narrative, a really convincing story of the events of this accident. And in every single case, it was the other guy who was at fault. I kid you not one of them had done anything wrong themselves in the stories they told. And there I sat in the gallery, sweating. You see, I was in my 20s, and I had already been in 2 serious accidents. And in both cases, I knew I was very clearly at fault. Yes, the other drivers contributed, and there were other factors that came into play, but I was the party in the car who made the first and biggest mistake. I had no idea what I was going to do if I had to be called to answer these questions. But blessedly, the jury was selected before they got to me. So I never had to confess my guilt in open court. Now, I knew that some among those 12 had done something wrong. They had contributed to these accidents, though I also doubt that they thought they were actually lying. So who has it right? Buddhist nun Pema Chodron, who says there are no true stories, we are making up every one of them? Or author Christina Baldwin, who posits there are only true stories and we are always discovering the truth in them? Well, both, of course. Our brains reward us when we create a coherent narrative, not just the true ones. And often we are motivated to tell a story in a certain way. Say, when we are publicly relating a story of a traumatic event. Social scientists call this motivated reasoning, which makes us all less than reliable narrators of our own lives. And not because we are necessarily consciously lying, but because we are motivated to tell, for all kinds of reasons, we are motivated to tell the story, to remember it even in certain ways. We also, another habit of our minds, another way our minds work, is that we tend to seek out evidence for what we already believe. Indeed, our brains give us another little dose of dopamine when we hear something that we agree with. Oh, yeah, that's right. I agree. That's just what I think, is a very pleasant feeling. And this then contributes to the phenomenon called confirmation bias. Now, this is a diagram of how that bias works in our brains. Unfortunately, our brains are scanning the horizon, seeking out the information that conforms to what we already think and to the stories that we already tell. That is what we look for. And this is true of all of us, right, left, center, or wherever we are on the spiraling timeline of our lives. We seek out information that we already agree with. So it is little wonder that we live in echo chambers and increasingly siloed lives. Yep, that's apparently exactly what an echo chamber can look like. And there are those silos close together, but not communicating. We bemoan this outcome and we want to cross those divides, and it's really, really hard. This is not to suggest that we accept or even look for merit in the awful things that some people think, the narratives that some people weave to make sense of the world and their lives, things that we know to be wrong and unjust. And yet it does ask us to come to the table with a touch more humility, given what we know about our motivated reasoning and our biases. It asks us to be willing to entertain the thought, I might just be wrong some of the time. There might be more to the story than I'm aware of. We need to be willing that we might just be swimming in water that we cannot see, and willing to listen to someone who says, hey, wait a minute, why are you all wet? Don't you see all the water around you? We need to keep our minds and our hearts open. We need to be willing to tell a new story, not to be trapped in the old stories, to write a new page, to write a new story into being. For we are not, as much as we'd like to think of the powers of our intellect, there's so much more to that story. As a colleague once preached, we like to think that we are rational creatures who also have emotions. Yet all the sciences are coming to see that rather we are emotional creatures who occasionally make rational decisions. We are far more creatures of instinct and emotion who have actually become very adept at backfilling our stories after the fact and coming up with rational reasons for what we have done. This probably has as much to do with all those jurors who were clear that the other guy was at fault in the accident that they were part of. And the truth is that when we do this, we do get a lovely little hit of dopamine, a moment of pleasure for that effort at thinking and feeling and telling a story that makes sense. So it behooves us to come to the table with humility, with kindness always. And I would add a good dollop of the curious. Another colleague says that when we come across an opinion we find desperately wrong, we should get curious, not furious. For the truth is that debating with facts, statistics, and data doesn't change a story, because most of the stories we tell are not about facts and data. They are about emotion and identity and what feels right, what feels best, even in our own stories. So I invite us all this day to open our hearts and minds to wonder, to be curious. And the truth is, we are actually very good at that. We do have minds that are curious, that are always seeking to learn and know more, to learn and grow. And that is at the root. That is the source of some of the most amazing things that we humans have managed to create. So embrace humility, kindness, of course, always, and curiosity. Those are always really good places to start, because the stories that we tell matter. The ways we make meaning of the world matters. Novelist Terry Pratchett and Bryan Stevenson, civil rights activist Bryan Stevenson, both tell us that changing the story can change the world. There is the story of a dramatically changed understanding of a captain of a slave ship that brought us the hymn Amazing Grace is a powerful example. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. And Stevenson says, there is something better waiting for us than we have experienced. Let us get there. And to get there, it means telling healing, hoping stories. Yes, sharing our lives, telling our stories, and also being willing and open to hearing another story that changes what we think. The joy of coming to know each other's minds. This is a time in the world that is changing so much. Wasn't Bob Dylan's song, didn't it feel as apt for today as it did for the time 60 years ago that he wrote it? 60 years and more that it was written. And remember, as Neil Gaiman and G.K. Chesterton combined to tell us, what we call fairy tales are actually more than true. Not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. The dragons of the stories that we hold on to tightly and may not be the most useful and healing and hopeful stories, those dragons can be beaten. And the dragons of the narratives that cause harm in the world, they too can be beaten with humor, with humility, with kindness, and with curiosity. Let us turn a page with glee that we can write a new story into being, a story of justice, kindness, goodness, and hope. Amen. And may it be so. So now I invite you into a time of prayer. Holy beingness of many names and no name, breath of wonder, weaving tales that hold us together, spirit of life which dwells within and among and beyond us this day and always. May we seek each day truth. May we tell a new story, learn a new thing, put it together in a new way, feel the pleasure, the delight of creating, bringing a new thing, a new thought into the world. And may we move with humility and openness to what new thing someone else has to tell me, what new perspective, what new insight flashes before me. May we, with all of that, move toward justice and love and kindness, ever kindness and curious love. And may all those who are ill find healing. May those who are in despair find hope. May those who are without shelter find home. And may all those in conflict and war in the Middle East and throughout the world, may we all know peace. Amen, and blessed be.
Please join me in singing our closing hymn, Come Sing a Song with Me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you home when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you home when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you home when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you home when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time.
Please join Reverend Dana in extinguishing your chalice at home. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. Those we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
So after a brief postlude, everyone will be placed into breakout rooms for a virtual coffee hour. It will be a little briefer than it usually is. And so go into the breakout room, grab yourself a cup of coffee, go into the breakout room, and then at about 11:25, you will get a note to come back for the congregational conversation on the budget. And also, if you are new to the congregation and you wish to go into the connecting room, this is the first time we are doing this, so stick around in the main, don't go out into a breakout room, stick around and we'll help you find your way in. And then please, even if you are new among us, please join us for our budget conversation to learn a little bit about how we do community together. I leave you with these words adapted from the Reverend Ma Teresa Tet Gallardo, President of the UU Church of the Philippines. Blessed with questions. Often we come here to be blessed with answers in a tumultuous world. Yet we may also find that we have been blessed with questions that guide us to a clarity of mind and steer our hearts and minds toward kindness, humility, and justice always. So may we be blessed with questions. Go forth in love. Go forth in good health. Go forth in peace. May it be so.
We hope you've enjoyed The Stories We Tell, presented by the Reverend Dana Worsnop, recorded on May 16th, 2021, for the Unitarian Universalist Church of Ventura, California.